Hey gang, my name is James White and welcome to the Signalnoise. Has that blue crotch been in every episode so far? Oh. I record every episode of the broadcast in front of the Signalnoise Archive, and I thought it was a good time to take a look at some of the materials that are back there. We're going to go back to 1994 and trace through the pages of Nintendo Power the release of one of my favorite Super Nintendo games of all time. Today we're looking at the lasting effects of Donkey Kong Country. Okay gang, here we go. This will be the final destination of today's video, the arrival of Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo. This game was released in November of 1994 and it was waiting for me under the Christmas tree a month later. Just a disclaimer, this video isn't going to be a deep dive into the game itself. What I'm going to be talking about is the marketing ramp up through the pages of Nintendo Power and the absolute hysteria that this game and the lead up to it induced into my childhood. I was in grade 12 at the time. I was 18 years old, and it was right at the perfect time for this game to land for the Super Nintendo. Me and my buddy Mike Field, we were Nintendo kids. We played video games all the way through elementary school, junior high, and high school, so I was still very much into the Super Nintendo when this came out, and it landed right at the perfect time. Let's rewind the clock from Christmas 1994 back to July of 1994 with issue number 62 of Nintendo Power. I've been subscribed to Nintendo Power at this point in the timeline for about a year and a half, and I anxiously anticipated every single issue when it arrived. And it normally arrived on the 5th or 6th of every month. And this is where the Donkey Kong Country story starts. So as you can see on the cover, we got some Street Fighter 2, a little bit of promo, but we're here for Donkey Kong Country. So let's crack this open and take a look at this section. Now this hot mess of a feature is called Play It Loud. And I guess we can blame David Carson for all this typography nonsense going on around here. But this is basically a preview of upcoming games laid out in some kind of nonsensical, free-form beat poetry weirdness with all the games being called out individually. So this is the section that we're focusing on right here. So this is our first glimpse at what Donkey Kong Country will look like. And already we can see these graphics here for this game are something different. It's something that we haven't seen before. And that's going to play out throughout this whole marketing roundup, where we were very used to sprite-based animation and design up until this point. So these characters look very rounded. It looked 3D. So this didn't make any sense when these images first came up. And I'm going to try to read this stupid thing to see. So it says, out of the jungle, and this weird little bit of content says, explore the untamed, I think that says hive, like this typography sucks. Hive, a life of action, challenge yourself. It's time to leave the yard and rock the jungle. That's some top form content writing right there. But this was our first glimpse at Donkey Kong Country, and like I said, this article here, or this feature, is just all about upcoming games laid out in a very nonsensical, stupid manner. So, yeah, so that's the first glimpse we have of Donkey Kong Country. They mention it one other time in this issue, in this feature called Pack Watch, and this is in every issue of Nintendo Power, but it's mentioned here. They're catching everybody up on some of the titles that they're going to be releasing at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, I believe. And they just mention some of the games that are going to be previewed, and Donkey Kong Country is thrown in here. And they're saying it's a true revolution in Super NES programming, and it's resulted in graphics that are almost beyond belief for Donkey Kong Country, and the game includes the best action ever. So they're already, I mean, this Nintendo Power, if you're familiar with this publication, it's a rag to promote Nintendo games. I love it for that exact reason, and I look forward to this every single month, but seeing this kind of language around an upcoming game it's not exactly rare. So we'll take that with a grain of salt as it is, but it was cool to see a little bit of a shout out to Donkey Kong Country. So this is in, again, July of 1994. So we're still in the summer months. So the next issue we have here, issue 63 of Nintendo Power, this is August of 1994. And cover feature is Stunt Race FX. Now, Stunt Race FX featured the Super FX chip. And that's something that they promoted a lot for games like this, and it was used in Star Fox and whatever. And that's going to come up in this issue in relation to Donkey Kong Country, which is really a really interesting little snip. So again, we go over to the Packwatch article or feature, and this time we have our first actual article on Donkey Kong Country, a little bit of write-up on what to expect. And a couple of pullouts from this is the Packwatch writer. He's seen over 1,000 games in his years, and this 800-pound, 32-megabit ape outpowers them all. So he's basically saying this is the best game that he's ever seen. And this also gives us more of a glimpse into the world of Donkey Kong Country and what this game will look like. And once again, it's different. Like, it just looks different from these sprite-based games that we're so used to. And I'm not calling down sprite-based animation or design at all, because I absolutely love these games to this day. This game just looked different. And for a release on the Super Nintendo, that was something that was out of the ordinary. So there was a certain amount of static that was manifested around Donkey Kong Country, which is really cool. This article also talks about the decline of the 16-bit systems. And that's noteworthy because this is 1994 and we're on the horizon. What we can see on the horizon is the Nintendo 64. They call it the Ultra 64 at this point. But we're seeing the kind of wind down of 16-bit games. And that's what makes this makes Donkey Kong Country so noteworthy, is it breathed new life into the Super Nintendo when Nintendo themselves were assuming that it was going to be winding down. So that's really interesting, and we'll be mentioning that later on. And they also mentioned the introduction of Diddy Kong, which is another character in the Donkey Kong universe. So it's not only about Donkey Kong, it's also going to be about other characters, and this is the first time that they mention him. So a couple of pages later in this, we have this ugly-ass spread, but this is a special report about the Consumer Electronics Show. So in between these issues, the CES happened, and they had a big reveal of Donkey Kong Country at the CES, and they talk about like how great it was and how it blew everybody away and what have you, which is great. And again, it's that language around promoting games, which is fine. But they mention in here that some people thought that the game concealed some new technology, chip, or processor, like the Super FX chip. And like we mentioned earlier, the Super FX chip was used in Stunt Race FX and Star Fox, so they thought the graphics in this game were so good that they thought there was some kind of hidden technology, which there wasn't. It was the process that was different, not the technology within it. And they mentioned that all the programming credit goes to Rare. So this is the first time we're getting a mention of Rare in relation to Donkey Kong Country, and the story of Rare is going to be really interesting, and it's going to play a really big part in the promotion of Donkey Kong Country along the way. And they also, you got to remember, this is 1994, so we're in the middle of the console wars of the 90s, and Nintendo and Sega have no problem throwing barbs back and forth at one another, which always made me laugh. But in this, they say, how big is Donkey Kong Country? Too big for Sega. They didn't dare show themselves at all. And 3DO and Jaguar cowered in shadowy corners. Enough said for now. Which is great. And I'm a self-proclaimed Nintendo kid since 1990 or 1988. My buddy Mike is the exact same way. So we have no problems, throwing some shade at Sega to this day just for the laughs, really. But it's great to see that in here because these guys just took no prisoners. And as an aside, they mention Killer Instinct here. Now, Killer Instinct is in development right now by Rare and Midway, I believe. And it's destined for arcades later this year, but it's also slated to be released on the Ultra 64. Or, what they mention here is Project Reality. So Project Reality and the Ultra 64 are the same thing, but I think this is a confusingly written little article because they seem to say that the Ultra 64 software is what the game is developed in and Project Reality is the system. So I don't know. They didn't get their ducks in a row quite yet, but and this is hard as hell to read with this thing in here. But anyway, the lineage of Killer Instinct is going to run parallel to Donkey Kong Country in a lot of ways, and we're going to see Killer Instinct pop up a couple of times in this story, but we're not here for Killer Instinct right now. We're here for Donkey Kong Country. So let's get moving along. So now we are moving into September of 1994 with volume 64. Now this is a really noteworthy issue for a couple of reasons. Number one, goddamn Mortal Kombat 2 right on the cover. Now, just as a side note, I was never into the Mortal Kombat video games, but I really loved the characters, and I think that was a result of seeing them in Nintendo Power and seeing the movie, honestly. Like, I still love the first Mortal Kombat movie. I am unapologetic about that, and it was really exciting to see Scorpion, or a weird representation of Scorpion on the cover here, which is great. And again, here's another call out. We got another call out to Killer Instinct. They have a six-page exclusive, which I'll throw under the camera here in a second. But we have we got some Donkey Kong Country business to attend to here. So we're gonna dive right in, and this is our first real in-depth look at the Donkey Kong Country video game. It's a 4-page article, and it sort of serves as a making of and the history and process of what went into making this game. Now, this came out, again, this is September, so I was just starting school that month, starting grade 12, and when this article hit, when this issue hit, I obsessed over this. Not so much because of these little crappy screen grabs that they put in here, but because of this. Like, a 3D rendered video game character was, you know, that was going to be the hope of where video games would eventually go, right? But to hear them talk about in this article how this is actually a part of the gaming process that ended up in the 16-bit platform was crazy. So how this went down was these two dudes right here. This is Chris and Tim Stamper of Rare. So Rare, a British company, they started experimenting with fully 3D characters, and they figured out a way to export frame by frame the animation of these characters, plug it into the 16-bit, and then string all of those images together for animation. And they were experimenting with this new medium when Tony Harmon, Product Acquisitions and Development Manager at Nintendo of America, visited them. So Tony was running around the globe, like, kind of looking for new technology and new games to maybe get involved in Nintendo, and he came across these guys, and they showed him a 10-frame snippet of what they were working on of a boxer. And that was enough to get him interested to go back to Nintendo of America, get a hold of Nintendo of Japan, and get the funds allocated to develop a full video game for the Super Nintendo based on that technology. 16-bit platforms at the time couldn't handle fully 3D characters. It was just, these things were just too complicated and the platforms weren't powerful enough. So, and this, because this technology is the same stuff that they used on Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park, that kind of stuff. But exporting these and stringing the sequences together is not an uncommon process of making video games. It was done with the Mortal Kombat franchise, where they took pictures or video of the martial arts experts and plugged those into the games. They just did it with 3D rendered assets, which is a stroke of genius. So these are the bits that I was obsessing over when I was a kid. All of these 3D renders showing these different angles of all the characters. Like, what was this game going to look like, you know? And seeing these rendered environments with the trees and the wood. But this little image in particular, I remember just obsessing over this when I was a kid, because it showed the wireframe of Diddy Kong, the clay render, I think they call it, and then two final renders with the texture. Seeing this process was just a glimpse into how this video game was made, which I absolutely obsessed over when I was a kid, because we rarely get this kind of glimpse into the making of a video game. And this section down here is talking about the technology, the Silicon Graphics workstations, and also hire 12 developers and develop this game over the course of 18 months, which both of those numbers for personnel and timeline seem super low compared to the extended numbers of today. And this was 1994. They had to battle with all manner of technological foibles along the way. But this was a huge article for me, and it was a giant step in the story of Donkey Kong Country for me. We're just going to flip. Now, this one here also, I believe, came with a Donkey Kong Country poster, but unfortunately, that one's lost to the ages. But before we move on, we got to take a flip back here to talk about Killer Instinct just for a hot second. Killer Instinct, the development of this game, was also done by Rare, and I believe maybe Midway. But the development of this game was running parallel to that of Donkey Kong Country. And I might do a video on this as well, because I have a really fond memory of the lead up to Killer Instinct. But this was being touted as an exclusive for the Ultra 64, which will become the Nintendo 64. But the game was being developed for arcade at the time, and it was going to be released in the fall of this same year, in 1994, around the same time as Donkey Kong Country. But this game, this was a huge part of my childhood as well, and it was really cool to see all of these 3D renderings of all of these characters. And, you know, Fulgore was my guy. I just loved what he looked like. He was a little bit clunky in the game. He was a little bit slow, but I just loved the fact that he was completely inorganic. He had these laser spikes, and then just a friggin' ponytail. Like, it made no sense, and I loved it. So it can't be understated how important Killer Instinct was. And the Killer Instinct trajectory will also be kind of shuffled around because of the success of Donkey Kong Country and due to the delay of the Ultra 64 or the Nintendo 64. So this is probably a video and a story for another time, but I thought it needed a nice shout out. October Volume 65 of Nintendo Power is when everything for me kicked into high gear. Now we have an Illusion of Gaia right here on the cover, and they're plugging Punch-Out. They have an 8-page feature on that. But again, we're here for Donkey Kong Country. So we take a look at the table of contents, and we see they got the preview, Donkey Kong Country, page 16. But this is the bit that we need to focus on. Exposed. Warning. In October, all Superpower Club members will be exposed to jungle fever. Keep checking your mailbox. Now that sounds super sinister. It sounds like an anthrax joint or something like that. This is going to come into play real soon later this month. As I said, I normally got these issues like the first few days of the month they release. So like October 5th or October 6th was around when these Nintendo Power issues landed in my mailbox. So let's get into this. Now I'm not going to dive too far into this article, because this article is more of a deep dive into the game itself, and we're not, as I said, this YouTube channel isn't about, we're not a video game channel, so I'm not going to dive into what they cover, but it's mostly, it's a preview of the story and Donkey Kong's pals, shows a lot of screen grabs, and there's some little tips and stuff, power-ups, some of the enemies that you encounter along the way, and little tricks on how to beat them. Again, power-ups and obstacles, but the main thing that they're showing here are like the variations in landscape, in levels, and that was something that I really obsessed over as well, because again, I haven't seen anything move yet, right? This is pre-internet, so I never saw exactly what this game looked like in motion. I could only obsess over these little screen grabs that they have, but again, it was all about these 3D renders. I absolutely loved these things, and I used to draw them all the time. I had a lot of those. Unfortunately, most of them are lost to the ages, but we'll come back to that. The final page of this, page 114, again, we have another preview, and Nintendo's pretty bold about this one. So we got a preview, and we got something big with Donkey Kong coming next month. The official Nintendo coverage of the Game of the Year. The damn thing's not even released yet, and they're calling it the Game of the Year. So that's pretty presumptuous, but they were proven to not be wrong based on the weight of Donkey Kong Country when this thing was released. Now, let's flip back to the table of contents page, because this is something that's going to come into effect real soon. A few days later, or maybe a week later in October, a box arrived in my mailbox. And see, I was 18 years old, it was pre-internet, I didn't order anything. So for something to show up that's a physical object other than a magazine is unheard of. But a box showed up with my name on it, and I had no idea what it was. And it was in like a shape about this. It was a white box with my address on it, and no address, no return address as far as I can remember. So I opened up that white box, and this is what was inside of it. The Donkey Kong Country VHS. Now this thing, I couldn't wait to throw this under the camera, because I absolutely obsessed over this thing when it arrived. I couldn't get it into the VCR quick enough because I was already a fan and I was interested in what Donkey Kong Country was going to look like. And I really was excited to play it. But this thing, this cemented Donkey Kong Country in my life to this day. Let's have a quick look at the intro sequence on this thing. Warning, it's very 90s. So it's called Donkey Kong Country Exposed, not unlike the ad we just saw, and it's a 15-minute making of documentary where the host tours Nintendo of America, their offices. We get people playing the game. We can actually see it. They give us tips and tricks. We get a making of. They get one of the Stamper boys on the phone and they get to ask him some questions about the 3D modeling and stuff. We talk about the soundtrack, and I was absolutely obsessed with this thing. I could not get home quick enough from school every single day to get this thing into the VCR. I watched it every day. It was crazy. So when you crack this thing open, first you get this little brochure exposed. And this is, well, look at this goddamn type. Wow. All of this, ridiculous. So they just show you what, it's just a little promo item telling you what's on the VHS. And this is the call out here. Where are you going to find it? Not on Sega Genesis or the 32X adapter, whatever the hell that is. Not on CD-ROM, take that Sony. Not on 64-bit. It's only on the Super NES. Reserve your copies now. So again, they have no problems throwing any barbs at Sega and everybody else. The beast is back. Look at that Lithos type. They even squished it down here. God damn it, Nintendo Power. So little brochure that comes with it, as well as this. Now here's, I gotta give Nintendo Power a little bit of beef on this one. See, on the front of this it says, free Donkey Kong Country Player's Guide offer inside in the Nintendo Power Super Power Club. And I was losing it over this, like, holy crap, I can get the Player's Guide? Like, when's that gonna show up? Before the game or whatever? And then I open it up, subscribe to Nintendo Power now and get a free Donkey Kong Country Player's Guide. I was so pissed, man, and here's the little thing, because I was already a subscriber, Nintendo. You already got my money, and now I can't get the free player's guide because I have to subscribe, what, again? Like, am I supposed to con Mike into getting a subscription and try to see if he'll, like, give me the player's guide when it shows up? So I was pissed at this. Nintendo, you gotta make this right, man. That's the, and here they even show what like what the cover looks like, man. And this is one of the only artifacts in the Donkey Kong Country archive that I don't have. So, God damn it, Nintendo, you got to make that right. But anyway, this was something that was a huge part of my life leading up to Christmas. And when this showed up, this is what cemented Donkey Kong Country in my psyche. You know, this was the only thing I asked for Christmas that year because of this. But we're not done with October yet. So I also drew this guy. Now, I no doubt drew this hoping to like maybe send it to Nintendo Power and have them publish it or something like that. So obviously it's some kind of a cover design and it shows Donkey Kong. I couldn't figure out how to draw the anatomy of an ape, even though I had all the reference I needed. I don't know why I didn't, but I drew him just as a dude wearing a suit. But that's Donkey Kong surrounded by all the other Nintendo mascots, and they're all looking pissed or bummed out because, man, Donkey Kong Country is coming and he is going to take over. Here's the original right here. So this is the original ink line. And I got this photocopied and then colored over top of the photocopy because, you know, if you use marker or colored pencil over top of ink, so that stuff's going to smudge. So this is a photocopied with the colored version. And I'm actually glad I never sent this into Nintendo Power because I still have it. But the cool thing about this is I time-stamped it on this little Todd McFarlane piece of paper down here. 1994, October 5th. So I would have drawn this very, very closely to when this issue of Nintendo Power arrived and when the VHS arrived. So all of this happened in a very short period of time. Like this all happened probably within a week. So you can see like how like potent Donkey Kong Country was in my life at this time right here when all of this stuff was happening within a week of each other. And every day I was watching this VHS. it was pretty crazy and pretty awesome. I wouldn't trade that stuff for nothing, man. Like, nostalgia is a powerful thing with the game itself. Yes, of course, playing it and experiencing that world and exploring it with the characters. But nostalgia is also all of the things that surround a game, right? So for me, seeing ramp-ups in Nintendo Power, and I've never done anything quite like this, where I traced the footsteps through a magazine that I had, 25 years later. And how did Nintendo Power position this to dupe all of us kids into being obsessed over this thing? And, I'm glad they did, and they did it masterfully. So, all right, so moving on to sort of the final stage is right here, man. We are at November, volume 66 of Nintendo Power, and I was losing my goddamn mind. So Christmas is about, a month and a half away or whenever from when this arrived, and Donkey Kong Country is on the cover of Nintendo Power magazine, and I was losing it because I was in Donkey Kong fever at this point because of that damn VHS and the drawing and everything else. And in this issue, before we dive into it, they had these cards. Now, I don't know if anybody remembers these things, but they used to have perforated, like, trading cards because the trading card boom was going on almost at the exact same time. And they had these trading cards of characters from games that they were looking to promote. So here's a bunch of bad guys from Donkey Kong Country, and these are the originals from back in the day. I punched them out and managed to keep them through all these years. So, and this was another little bit of the hysteria. Like, man, Nintendo Power really pulled out all the stops to make sure all us kids were just being pummeled with promotion for Donkey Kong Country, and man, I was loving it. Oh, and these cards have like little, descriptions of them and like little tips on how to beat them and stuff. And yep, they're using some ugly ass comic book font on the back of that too. Typography wasn't Nintendo Power's strong suit back in the early to mid 90s, but we'll let them get away with it, man. All right, so let's dive into this one. We got a Donkey Kong feature. And I'm not going to dive too heavy into this article because, again, this isn't a video game channel. You can find loads of people that talk about Donkey Kong Country on YouTube, I'm sure. But this just walks us through a lot of the levels, the areas. There's tips and strategies. Here's one of those walkthroughs. But the main thing is showing the environments, and all the different weather and stuff that we encounter along the way. So you see some rain up here, and there's some mines and stalactites, is that what these things are called? And like some nice renders of all the characters around. Some water levels, of course, which are a staple in platformers and side scrollers. But this is the bit that I obsessed over a lot when I was a kid, because I'm Canadian. We got a lot of snow up there, and it was really cool to see like a lot of the snow levels and how they handled blizzard conditions and that kind of thing. So seeing all of these was really cool. But again, all of these 3D renders of these characters, I drew a lot of these guys obsessively through the lead up to actually owning this game. So really cool. And let's just talk about numbers for a second. So at the beginning of this video, we went through a handful of smaller articles and mentions of Donkey Kong Country. Then we had a 4-page making of. Then they upgraded to an 8-page article, and now this one is a 10-page article. And we could see those numbers rising as we go. And they dedicated a lot of ink to Donkey Kong Country in the lead up to this for Christmas of '94. Which, I tell you, being an 18-year-old kid that was down with Super Nintendo, this was awesome. This whole thing. And they kept the branding consistent too, because the VHS is Donkey Kong Country Exposed, and they kept this branding consistent with the branding of all the articles that they released too. They had this Exposed banner down here. Inside coverage of this year's hottest super... blah, blah. Nice one, Nintendo. So that's cool. So let's flip a little bit more into this issue, and let's go, like, this is one of my favorite features of Nintendo Power, like the top 20. And here we see Donkey Kong Country clocking in at number 6 with 9,562 damn mystery points or whatever. But for a game, and again, the damn game's not even out yet. This is early November 1994, and the game's coming out in later November, but already it's on the top 10 or the top 20 list. This is obviously marketing or whatever, but clocking in behind Super Metroid, Super Street Fighter 2, Link to the Past, Ken Griffey Jr. Baseball, which I loved, and NBA Jam. That's a pretty good who's who of video games at the time, and Donkey Kong is like nipping at their heels, and in 2 short months that guy's going to be number 1. One more item in this issue of Nintendo Power is the Now Playing section, and we have a little feature on Donkey Kong Country right here. So this is more of a logistical look at the game itself. So the company, Nintendo, of course, suggested retail price is $70. The release date is going to be November 1994. They were good about putting that right there, saying that's this month, man. Memory size, 32 megabits, and that's noteworthy because none of the other games listed here on these 4 pages have anywhere near 32 megabits as a memory size, except for Street Hockey 95 has 24 megabits. That's the closest that we get to that 32, and I've never even heard of this damn game before. Yo, Mike, if you're watching this, have you ever heard of this game, Street Hockey 95? I don't know if you've ever played this thing, and according to the pros and cons, it has awkward play control, so I don't know if you've ever played that, but I don't know why they would need 24 megabits for whatever the hell that is, but hey, we'll see. Now there's a game called Balls. However, another little aside from this article, they have these little pros and cons at the bottom, and I got to laugh when I read the Donkey Kong Country pros and cons. So the plus, is the ultimate graphics in the best action-adventure game ever for the Super NES or any video game system. Oh, you better calm down, Nintendo Power. It's simply the best. Battery backed up memory, 100 bonus areas. That's the pro, and that's some pretty big talk, man. So the con, the con is players may miss many of the bonus areas and think the game is shorter than it really is. In brackets, you must try everything to get the full impact. So even the con is kind of a pro. In the con, they're saying the game is huge and you should explore around to find all these awesome bonus areas. So if that ain't no con. That's some snappy writing right there. That's some good stuff. So this was November, volume 66 of Nintendo Power, the Donkey Kong cover feature. We move into December. Now, December is a weird month because, you know, most parents have done their Christmas shopping at this point whenever this magazine would have landed, I would think. Or the kids were already hounding their parents to get Donkey Kong Country for Christmas. So there's not a bunch of Donkey Kong Country coverage in this, certainly not as much as we've seen before. But there are a couple of interesting call-outs, and this one here is definitely one. On the Player's Pulse, the letters page, we have a letter from a very enthusiastic Max Johnson, who got the VHS in the mail, and he had the same reaction as me. He went crazy for it and loved it. His eyeballs popped out or whatever, and he watches it every day. So I can't. This is fanboy stuff, but hey, man, I had the exact same reaction. So you know, I agree with you, Maximum Johnson. But this is what we're talking about down here. It says, like, in every issue, the Nintendo Power staff kind of reach out to their readership and ask, like, what do you think of X? And this one, they're asking about the VHS, this guy. So they say, the making of Donkey Kong Country video has been in your hands for over a month now, and you probably have the game now. How well did the video prepare you for the actual game experience? So this is Nintendo Power asking, did this work? Did this marketing work? Like, how did it feel in the lead up to the release of the actual game? And did this help, like, enrich your experience, basically? And that's really cool to see. And we just got one little snip. This is all, like, this December issue is kind of like an afterthought. But the best thing about this issue is this page right here. So we get a little plug for Donkey Kong Country merch on the very last page of this issue from the Nintendo Power Super Power Supplies catalog. Now, if anybody out there knows what the hell this is, please leave a comment, because I don't have no idea what this is, and I have no memory of how you would get a hold of this catalog. But this ad is plugging Donkey Kong Country Jungle Gear, now available in the Winter 94 catalog. Again, I have no idea, and there's no information on where to send away for this catalog or how to order these. There's nothing. So they plugged the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack that's available on cassette and CD. It's a dope-ass soundtrack. I can totally see why they did that. This hot turd of a Donkey Kong and Diddy t-shirt, which is just a like some cover art, the cover art slapped on the front without all the logos, and on the back, I guess, and the front has a little pocket with Diddy and Donkey kind of peeking out. A Diddy cap, but this is the thing that ticks me off the most, is like, I would love to have, I would totally wear this now. It's the DK family sweatshirt, and it's just like a crappy gray sweatshirt with a foolish print on it. That's just the Donkey Kong family and all their signatures below it, which probably doesn't show up on camera, but it's great. All the great products featured on this page are only available through the Super Power Supplies catalog. Check out the catalog for many more great items. Where the hell is the catalog? I don't know how to get this thing. I don't even know what it was. And there's no contact information. This is pre-internet, so it's not like you can just jump onto their website. So come on, Nintendo Power, you fooled this up, because, man, I would have got that stupid-looking sweatshirt, and I would have wore that to this day. So, as a little bit of an aside, and this is the final wrap-up item here, is the first issue of Nintendo Power from January 1995. And it's just this little shout-out that they give to Rare right here on the letters page. And I never noticed this back in the day. We would like to take this opportunity to send a big thank you to Rare for creating our new rendered logo. Now, I believe that Nintendo Power has used this logo, like, since this issue, for the duration of their tenure, I believed. I don't know if they had a new one or not. It was always, from what I remember from this point on, it was always a 3D rendered logo. So I had no idea that Rare were actually the people that rendered that logo. So it was nice to see a little bit of crossover again with the people that made Donkey Kong Country. And, you know, both companies are in bed together at this point, and they're all doing good work. So got them to render the Nintendo Power logo. I'm still partial to the original Nintendo Power logo with just a straight up yellow and red, but, you know, I'm old school about that stuff. Let's clock in on December 25th, 1994. I got up and it was Christmas morning, and Donkey Kong Country was waiting for me underneath that tree. Mom and Dad really knocked it out of the park. And this game has been a part of my psyche ever since. And it's something that will always stay with me, in a memory that will never go away anytime soon. For the nostalgia, for the marketing ramp, and for the creativity behind this game, which is awesome. So now, just as a little bit of a wrap up to this segment of the video, Donkey Kong's financial success was a major factor in keeping sales of the Super Nintendo high at a time when next generation consoles like the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn were being released. So Donkey Kong Country came around right at the right time to breathe new life into a console that was supposed to be winding down at the time. But then we realized there was still a lot more power left in the Super Nintendo, which was really cool because the Super Nintendo remains one of my favorite consoles of all time. It was the only video game listed in Time's top 10 best products of 1994. The only video game listed, which is awesome. But, goddamn Time, this achievement is somewhat overshadowed by the game's later inclusion in Time's 2005 list of top 10 most overrated games of all time. Now, I'm going to have to write an angry letter to Time, because that is some nonsense right there. The game sold 6 million units in its first holiday season. One of those was mine. And after selling 9 million units, Donkey Kong Country became the second best-selling Super Nintendo game behind Super Mario All-Stars, and set a record for the fastest-selling video game of all time. And that is nothing to be sneezed at, and that is no monkey business. I think that's as good a place to wrap this up as any on a bad joke. Thanks so much for checking this out, gang. Really appreciate it, and I hope you've enjoyed this little trip down memory lane with one of my favorite video games, Donkey Kong Country, only for Nintendo.
Tell you what, you better reserve this game before November 21st, because that's when it comes out in the stores. I already got mine.
The format of this episode is very different from the previous, so please leave a comment below and let me know what you enjoyed and what you might like to see in the future. The Signalnoise Archive is vast. I got a lot of fun stories to tell. So thank you very much for swinging by, gang. If you want to show some support for the channel, just like, subscribe, tell a friend. You can drop by the Signalnoise store to see what merch I have available. All that stuff helps. But until next time, my name is James White, and this is the Signalnoise broadcast. Stay rad.